My sister tripled my rent to $6,800. I stayed calm. Then she went pale when she learned I owned the building.
It all started on a morning I'll never forget. I woke up to a quiet house, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air is holding its breath. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that day. My life was normal, if you could call it that. I had a steady job, a small apartment in the city I loved, and a sister I trusted more than anyone. My sister and I had always been close. We'd grown up sharing everything, secrets, clothes, dreams. But I didn't know then that this day would change everything between us. When I opened my phone, there was a message from her. Just a single line. "We need to talk. Come to the building office." I didn't think much of it. She often wanted to talk about small things, but there was something in the way she wrote it. No emojis, no explanation, just those few words. Something about it felt serious. My stomach twisted. The building we lived in wasn't just a building. I owned it. Quietly, without anyone knowing, I'd been investing in it for years. It was my safety net, my backup plan. I'd worked so hard to keep it running, fixing leaks myself late at night, dealing with tenants' complaints, balancing the books, and it was finally paying off. That morning, though, I didn't know my sister was about to put it all to the test. When I arrived at the office, she was pacing. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. She looked different. I tried to brush it off. "What's wrong?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed to a printed paper on the desk. It was my rent notice. My rent tripled. From a reasonable $2,200 to $6,800. My heart stopped. I blinked, thinking I must be seeing things wrong. "Why?" was all I could say. Her voice trembled. "Because it's fair. You need to pay what it's worth." She said it as if it were obvious, but something in her tone made me freeze. She wasn't angry. She looked scared, like she was waiting for something, a thing terrible to happen. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. My sister, the one person I trusted, had just doubled, no, tripled, my rent. I could feel my chest tighten. My first instinct was shock, then confusion. But I didn't yell. I didn't react the way she might have expected. I stayed calm, calm as stone, and that seemed to unnerve her. She stepped back, her eyes searching mine like she'd crossed an invisible line she couldn't return from. I leaned against the desk and looked around the office. The walls, the papers, the quiet hum of the building somewhere beyond. And then I said nothing. Because I already knew the truth. I hadn't said out loud yet, I owned this building. Everything in it belonged to me. The truth was hidden from her, from everyone else. I had never told her, not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I wanted to protect her. I wanted to keep our relationship simple, without power or money between us. But here she was, making a move that threatened everything. I could feel my voice catch. "Do you realize what you just did?" I asked finally. My words were steady, but my heart was pounding. She shook her head, looking away. That was when I saw it. Her fear, creeping over her face like a shadow. She knew something. She had realized something she wasn't supposed to, and whatever it was had scared her. The air between us felt heavy, like the moment right before a storm hits. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched her, waiting for her to explain, to make sense of the impossible tension between us. But she didn't. She just stared back, pale and silent. Something deep inside me told me this wasn't just about rent. This was about control, about secrets, about something bigger. And whatever it was, I wasn't ready to find out yet. But that silence, it stayed with me all day. That moment, the look in her eyes. I kept replaying it in my head, like a puzzle I couldn't solve. That night, I lay awake thinking about it, my mind spinning. What had driven her to do something so bold? And more importantly, what would happen when she realized I knew exactly what she was doing? Because I wasn't just calm, I was ready. And I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to that moment in the office, the way my sister had stood there, pale, breathing fast, like she'd just crossed a dangerous line. I kept replaying her words in my head. You need to pay what it's worth. But that wasn't the whole story. There was something hidden behind those words, something she wasn't telling me. The next morning, I decided I had to confront her again. I wasn't sure if it was curiosity or fear driving me. Maybe both. I walked into the kitchen where she was already making coffee. Her hands trembling slightly as she stirred. She didn't look up. I sat down across from her, trying to meet her gaze. "Why, Emma?" I asked softly. "Why would you do this to me?" She stayed silent for a moment, staring into her cup. Then she finally looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Anger? Desperation? Guilt? "It's not what you think," she said quietly. But her voice lacked conviction. That's when I noticed something else. Her hands weren't just trembling. They were shaking, as if she'd been holding something heavy for too long. And I realized this wasn't just about rent. It was about her. Something had driven her to this point, and I didn't know what it was yet. Over the next few days, things changed. Every time I saw her, there was a tension between us, unspoken but thick enough to cut through the air. She avoided my eyes, kept her distance, and yet she kept bringing up the rent. Not directly, but in small comments. At breakfast, she said, "It's hard running things when people don't understand value." At the laundromat, she murmured, "You can't protect everyone forever." I started wondering if this was about anything bigger than money. Was she trying to punish me? Was there something I'd done to her without realizing? One evening, I decided to walk through the building. I needed answers. I moved from floor to floor, passing tenants who smiled politely, but looked at me differently now. There was a shift in the air. Even the walls seemed heavier. On the third floor, I stopped in front of her apartment door. Something felt off. I knocked gently. No answer. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, her apartment was quiet. But then I saw it. Papers scattered across the floor. Bills, notices, a small pile of folders stacked in a corner. My heart sank. I picked one up. It was an eviction notice for one of the tenants, and not just any tenant. Someone I knew. Someone she had evicted without telling me. My breath caught. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just about rent. This was about control, power, secrets. Later that night, I confronted her. "Emma, what's going on? Why are you doing this?" My voice was sharper now. I wasn't just confused anymore. I was angry, hurt. She looked at me, and for the first time, her walls cracked. Her voice was low, trembling. "Alec, you don't understand. There are things going on that you can't see. Things that aren't fair. People are being taken advantage of. And I can't just sit back anymore." Her words hung in the air. I wanted to ask her to explain, but she didn't say more. Instead, she walked away. heard the click of her door closing behind her, and the sound echoed in my ears. That night, I lay awake again, thinking about what she had said. My sister, the one person I trusted, was hiding something. Something big, and it was pushing her to make decisions that could destroy everything I had built. Over the next week, I started paying more attention to what was happening in the building. I noticed her making private phone calls late at night. I saw her meeting with people I didn't know, whispering urgently, and every time I tried to approach her, she would pull away. It was like she was living in a world I couldn't see, a world of her own making, and it terrified me. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of her door again. My heart was pounding. I didn't knock this time. I just opened it. Inside, the apartment was darker than usual. Papers were everywhere, and the air smelled of coffee and something sharper. Fear, maybe anger. She was sitting at her desk, her head in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "Alec, you shouldn't be here," she whispered. But I couldn't leave. Not now. Not when the truth was so close. "Tell me," I said softly. "Tell me what's going on." Her hands shook again. She looked away, then back at me. "If I tell you, you won't look at me the same way. You won't understand. This changes everything." And that's when I knew. I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't step back from. Something was coming. Something that would change everything between us. And I wasn't sure I was ready for it. But I knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. My dreams had been restless. Flashes of Emma's pale face, her trembling hands, the papers scattered across her floor. It was like my mind was trying to warn me, but I didn't understand what. I made coffee quietly, letting the steam curl up in front of me. The apartment felt colder than usual, though the sun was bright outside. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. "We need to talk, now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat and stepped out into the street. Her apartment building loomed ahead, tall and imposing the way it always had. But now it felt different, ominous. When I got inside, she was waiting in the lobby. No words at first, just a long, silent stare. Then she led me upstairs without saying a thing. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate. My heart kept beating faster, each step echoing in my head like a warning. We entered her apartment, and it was worse than I had imagined. Papers everywhere. Bills, eviction notices, scribbled notes. But then I saw it. A folder thicker than the rest, marked in bold letters. Tenant complaints. I froze. Emma looked up at me, her eyes tired, but burning with something intense. "Alec, these aren't just bills or notices. These are proof." She handed me the folder. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were dozens of pages, complaints, records, photographs, evidence that certain tenants had been forced out unfairly. Some were elderly, others had disabilities, and some were paying much more than they should. The reality hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about rent at all. Emma had been fighting something hidden inside the building I owned without knowing. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked down. "Because I wanted to protect you, protect the building. But it's bigger than us now. There are people here who will stop at nothing to keep this quiet." I glanced around. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air was thick with fear. "What do you mean?" I pressed. Emma's voice was low, almost a whisper. "This isn't just rent. It's corruption, bribes, exploitation. And it's been going on for years. They don't want it exposed." I felt my stomach twist. My own sister, fighting against a force I hadn't even known existed. And I realized this was why she tripled my rent. She was trying to give me a reason to listen, to make me dig deeper. But she had underestimated how much this would cost her. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at her door. Emma froze. My heart jumped. "Who is it?" I whispered. "No one you want to talk to," she said sharply. She moved to block the door, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent. My breath quickened. Then, without warning, the door burst open. A man I'd never seen stepped in. His face was hard, his eyes cold. He didn't speak, just stared at Emma. She stepped in front of me, her body tense. "It's nothing," she said, but her voice betrayed her. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. He moved toward her, his steps deliberate. "Emma, we need those papers." I felt my stomach drop. Papers, the folder, the proof she had been keeping hidden. Emma's hands clenched. "No, you're not taking them." Her voice cracked. "Not after everything." He stepped closer. "You don't have a choice." My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. Not when I was this close to knowing the truth. "Emma," I said, stepping forward. "What is this about?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain. "It's about justice and survival." The man lunged for the folder. Emma shoved me back, and in that instant, everything exploded. Papers scattered across the floor. Emma and the man struggled. Voices rose, shouting filled the room. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Somewhere in the chaos, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about rent, not about sisterly betrayal. It was about something much bigger, about standing up when no one else would. Suddenly, the struggle ended. The man pulled back, glaring at us both. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you will." Then he turned and left. Emma sank into a chair, her face pale. I knelt beside her. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. What did he mean? Who was that? She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded toward the folder on the floor. "Everything you need to know is in there. But Alec, once you open it, there's no turning back." I swallowed hard. My hands hovered over the folder. My heart was pounding. Outside, the street was quiet, but inside my chest, a storm was raging. And I knew she was right. Once I opened that folder, my life and our lives would never be the same. The building, the rent, the fight, it was all connected. And I was about to find out how deep it went. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The folder lay unopened on my desk. My mind was torn between fear and curiosity. I could hear Emma's words echoing in my head. "There's no turning back." I stared at the door, wondering if I was ready for what came next. Because deep down, I knew this was no longer just my sister's fight. It was mine. And whatever lay ahead, it was going to change everything forever. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying every detail. The knock at Emma's door, the stranger's cold stare, her trembling hands as she clutched that folder. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spinning. I kept telling myself, just open it, just open it. By morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know. I sat at my desk, the folder in front of me like some forbidden book. My hands shook as I peeled it open. The sound of paper rustling was deafening in the quiet room. Inside were photographs, names, numbers, copies of legal documents, proof of deliberate rent hikes, intimidation, threats. Tenants who had been forced out, some unable to fight back, others too afraid to speak. Every page was a piece of a puzzle, but together they painted something horrifying. I found an envelope at the bottom, labeled simply, "For Alec." My hands hesitated, then I opened it. Inside was a note in Emma's handwriting. "You need to know the truth. They won't stop until everything is buried. Be careful." My heart pounded. I looked up, almost expecting Emma to be behind me. She wasn't. I called her, but no answer. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Meet me. Now." Upstairs. The air in the building felt different. Tense. Heavy. When I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps felt louder. I could hear whispers somewhere, the faint hum of movement above. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step making my chest tighten. Emma was waiting for me at the top. Her face was pale. She looked exhausted, but her eyes burned with determination. "You opened it," she said softly. "I had to," I said, my voice shaking. "Emma, it's huge. People need to know." She nodded. "They already know, Alec. That's why they're here. That's why they tried to scare me yesterday. This is bigger than rent. It's about power, about control. And now, they'll stop at nothing." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from down the hall. We froze. Then footsteps, fast, heavy, approached. My stomach dropped. "They're coming," Emma whispered. "We have to get out." But I couldn't move. I was trapped in the weight of what I had just discovered. All those faces, those lives ruined. And now, we were in danger. The door to the stairwell burst open. 2 men I didn't recognize stood there, blocking our way. They looked at us with cold eyes. Emma stepped forward. "Leave her out of this," she said firmly. One of them smirked. "She already knows too much." My breath caught. My mind raced. We were surrounded. The folder, my proof, was clutched tightly in my hands. "You don't understand," I said, my voice breaking. "This isn't just about us. This is about truth and justice." The men exchanged a look. One stepped forward, his hand reaching for the folder. Emma stepped between us. "You won't take this," she said, "not without a fight." Then chaos erupted. I heard shouting, the sound of struggle, the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. My ears rang. Time slowed. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they could hear it too. Somehow, Emma managed to push one man back. The other grabbed her arm, twisting it. She cried out, and I felt a surge of anger and fear. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but loud. "Stop!" They froze. Something in my tone, something desperate, must have given them pause. They looked at each other, then backed away. Without another word, they turned and disappeared into the stairwell, leaving the hallway silent, except for our ragged breaths. I sank to the floor beside Emma. Her hand was trembling, but she still held the folder, tight. My own hands were shaking. "Emma, what now?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes fierce. "Now we expose it. We show the world." Her voice broke. But we have to be careful. They will come for us. They'll try to bury us the way they buried everyone else. I stared at the folder. Every piece of evidence inside felt like a piece of my own soul being pulled apart. This was no longer just about rent, or even about me and Emma. This was about every person who had ever been silenced. And now, I had the choice. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then Emma whispered, "Do you trust me?" I nodded. "I trust you, but I'm scared." She reached for my hand. "Good. That means we're human, and that means we're still capable of fighting back." We walked down the hallway together, the folder between us like a shield. Somewhere outside, the city moved on, unaware of what had just happened inside that building. But for us, everything had changed. We knew there was no turning back. Because once the truth comes out, there is no going back to the life you had before, and whatever happened next would decide everything. We didn't speak as we walked down the hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last. The folder was still clutched between us, an unspoken promise that we couldn't turn back now. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of the storm we had just stepped into. When we reached the street, the air felt colder. My chest still ached from the adrenaline, and my hands trembled. Emma pulled me into a side alley, away from any curious eyes. She dropped the folder on the ground and looked at me like she was searching for courage in my face. "We have proof," she said softly. "Names, documents, everything. This is bigger than us. This is about the people who can't fight back, the ones who have been silenced." I looked down at the folder. It felt heavier now, not because of paper, but because of the weight of truth. Every page was a story, stories of injustice, intimidation, and broken lives. People who had been forced out, who had lost everything, people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Until now. We knew what we had to do. We had to make this known. But there was fear in me. Real, deep fear. Not just for us, but for what would happen after. The folder was dangerous. Whoever had done this wouldn't let it go quietly. And I knew they would come for us. Emma touched my arm gently. "We have a choice, Alec. We can bury this, stay safe, keep our lives quiet. Or we can fight. And once we fight, there's no turning back." Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with determination. I nodded slowly. "We fight." The next days were chaos. We moved in silence, careful who we spoke to. Every conversation felt like a risk. We copied every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. We found allies, people willing to stand with us. And then, we went public. The first post was short. They tried to silence us. They tried to scare us. But we have proof. And now, the world will know. Along with the post came photos, documents, and names. The response was immediate. Messages poured in. Support, outrage, fear. Some were grateful. Others warned us. But most importantly, people began to speak. Tenants who had been forced out started sharing their stories. Others came forward with evidence of their own. What started as our fight became a movement. But it wasn't easy. Threats came. Strange cars followed us. My phone rang with silent calls. Emma and I became shadows of ourselves, always looking over our shoulders. We lost sleep. We lost peace. but we gained something far greater: truth. One night, months later, we stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. The folder was gone now, handed over to journalists who promised to protect its contents. We watched the city lights shimmer, each one representing lives we could never forget. Emma broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" I looked at her, then at the horizon, very second. Because this wasn't just about rent, this was about power. And if we don't stand up, no one will. She nodded slowly. They tried to break us, but they didn't know what we had. "What was that?" I asked. "Courage," she said. And I realized she was right. That was what it had been all along. Pure courage. Not just to fight back, but to keep going when every instinct told us to stop. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. For every person who had been silenced, every truth that had been buried, we had opened a door. And once a door is opened, the world changes. I know we will never be the same, but maybe that's the point. Because truth changes people, and people change the world. So I leave you with this. What will you do when you know the truth? Will you stay silent, or will you stand up? Because the real question isn't whether the truth exists. It's whether we have the courage to face it. And I promise you this. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. We walked away from that rooftop that night, but the story stayed with me. Every step I took, I carried it inside me, not just as Alec Rose, but as someone who had seen the power of truth and the cost of silence. And if my story can make just one person stand up, then maybe everything we went through was worth it. Because the real fight never ends. It just changes shape. And ours has only just begun.